David Anthony Burke, better known as David, wasn't just another Gen Z artist. He was the soundtrack of an era, a self-made kid who went from gaming in his bedroom to performing on Jimmy Kimmel, collaborating with SCA, and pulling 30 million monthly listeners on Spotify. He had that quiet guy with a dark soul aesthetic that made fans feel like he got them, the heartbreak, the loneliness, the chaos. But behind the chill voice and the black hoodie was something else entirely, something sick, something that had been festering online for years, hidden in his lyrics, his live streams, and even his jokes. Because David wasn't just writing about darkness, he was living it. Police now believe that this same rising star, the one who wrote Romantic Homicide, had a secret obsession that turned deadly. An addiction to real-life gore videos, torture clips, and the kind of content that slowly rewires your empathy until nothing feels real anymore. And buried beneath the fame, the charts, and the millions of streams was a trail of self-snitching, a digital diary of a kid who blurred the line between fantasy and reality until someone died for it. This is the story of how a teenage gore addiction destroyed one of Gen Z's fastest rising stars and turned David's entire career into a confession hiding in plain sight. After the news broke, the internet froze. Fans who once defended David, the shy kid with a golden voice, were suddenly forced to confront something they couldn't explain. Because what the police found didn't sound like a rumor, it sounded like a horror movie. It all started on September 8, 2025, when workers at a Los Angeles tow yard noticed a foul chemical stench coming from an impounded Tesla. They assumed it was just another abandoned car, until the smell got worse. They called LAPD. When detectives opened the trunk, they found black plastic bags leaking fluid. Inside were the dismembered remains of a young girl, decomposed beyond recognition. The condition of the body told investigators everything they needed to know. She had been dead for weeks, possibly more. At first, it was just another tragic case, until they ran the plates. The Tesla was registered to David Anthony Burke, the 19-year-old music prodigy the world knew as David, the same artist who, just days earlier, had been performing for sold-out crowds while police were unknowingly towing a crime scene with his name on it. The shock spread fast. Twitter threads blew up, fan pages went private, and Reddit turned into a live crime board overnight. Was it a setup? A stalker? A revenge plot? People clung to any explanation that made sense, because the alternative was unthinkable. But then came the press release. The victim's identity was confirmed. 15-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez, a girl who had been missing for over a year. Her mother told reporters that Celeste's boyfriend was someone named David. That was all investigators needed to connect the dots. The body in the Tesla, the missing girl, and the rising star all collided in one horrifying revelation. David wasn't just the owner of the car. He was now the center of an active death investigation, and the clean, quiet image that built his career was starting to rot, just like what police found inside that trunk. At first, fans couldn't believe it. There had to be an explanation, a mix-up, a frame job, something. After all, David wasn't a criminal. He was a dreamer, the homeschooled kid who made it big. But as the internet started connecting the dots, the story got darker, much darker. Just months before the discovery, David was living the fantasy every teenager wanted. Performing on Jimmy Kimmel, collaborating with Kaylee Uchis, and selling out international shows. His image was spotless, quiet, polite, talented. So why did everything around him suddenly feel staged? The first red flag came from his own words. In one interview, David casually mentioned he wanted to retire early, move off the grid, disappear to an island in about 4 to 5 years. Fans thought it was poetic, but now, that 4 to 5 years sounded sinister, because that's exactly when Celeste, the girl he allegedly met as a preteen, would have turned 18. Legal age, the perfect cover for a clean future, if she had lived to see it. Then came the tattoo. Police confirmed that Celeste's body was identified by a small shush tattoo on her index finger. the same design David proudly showed in photos and videos. What once looked like a cute artistic match now felt like a brand, an ownership mark. People began revisiting his lyrics, his visuals, even his interviews, and realizing how often he flirted with death, control, and obsession. In hindsight, the clues were everywhere. The romantic lyrics, the cinematic videos showing bodies in trunks, blood-stained scenes, and lovers who couldn't leave. He wasn't hiding his mindset. He was broadcasting it, wrapped in melody, masked by aesthetic. It wasn't a coincidence. Every artistic choice, every lyric, every eerie image had been leading here. Fans once praised David for being mysterious. Now they realized they'd been watching a confession, one he'd been performing in plain sight. To understand how a promising teenage musician spiraled into something this disturbing, you have to go back, before the fame, before the charts, to the dark corners of the internet, where David's curiosity turned into a compulsion. David Anthony Burke didn't grow up struggling. He was homeschooled, raised in a comfortable religious household, with a father working for a global law firm and a stable family life. From the outside, he was the last person you'd expect to end up here. But while his parents thought he was just gaming, David was spending hours in the kind of online spaces no kid should ever find. In his own Discord messages, he admitted, "I used to be addicted to watching gore vids." LiveLeak was bookmarked. At 14, while other kids were watching cartoons or anime, he was watching cartel executions and graphic torture clips on Reddit. He said it got to a point where he didn't even flinch anymore. "I don't cringe when I see it no more. I remember laughing at one point." That wasn't just desensitization. That was a psychological shift. The human brain isn't built to process that kind of horror, especially at that age. Repeated exposure rewires empathy, turns fear into fascination, and fascination into obsession. David later confessed he began to like writing gory romantic quotes and stories about death. He was feeding two addictions at once: the dopamine rush of the music and the thrill of violence that no longer scared him. Some people escape trauma through art. David was doing the opposite, using art to justify his trauma. The gore videos didn't just numb him, they became his new form of inspiration. Each track he wrote blurred the line between creative fantasy and real violence just a little more. By the time he started releasing music, David wasn't trying to express pain, he was trying to recreate it. The gore had carved out his sense of empathy, and in its place grew the twisted idea that death could be poetic, that control could be love, and that if he couldn't keep someone in life, he'd keep them in death. What started as a morbid fascination had now evolved into something far worse. David wasn't just desensitized to death, he was romanticizing it. And that mindset began bleeding into every corner of his art, until his music became a mirror of his decaying psyche. He once wrote that he liked gory psychological drama, romantic quotes, and a lot of death. For most people, that's just edgy writing. For David, it was becoming an identity, one he performed, one he lived. If you trace his discography, you can literally hear his mental unraveling. Each release grew darker, songs about control, obsession, and revenge disguised as love. The tone shifted from heartbreak to hostility, from "can't live without you" to "can't let you go alive." Fans thought it was artistic evolution, a young artist finding his style. But beneath the metaphors, the truth was disturbingly literal. Psychologists call it romanticized ownership delusion, the belief that killing someone binds them to you forever. It's the same pattern seen in serial offenders who see death not as the end, but as the ultimate connection. And in David's case, the symbolism was everywhere. The red string motif in his music videos, a reference to the myth that two people are destined to be tied by fate, wasn't just aesthetic. It mirrored the signature left by Brian Moser, the fictional serial killer in Dexter, known for dismembering victims and wrapping them in red thread. David wasn't copying art, he was adopting a persona. On Discord, he bragged about writing gory love stories. In interviews, he talked about wanting to live alone on an island, detached from society. And in his music, he began painting violence as devotion, as if harming someone was proof of feeling something real. That mindset didn't appear overnight. It was built brick by brick through years of isolation, gore, and emotional detachment, and now it had full control. The lines between fiction and confession no longer existed. By the time his lyrics started echoing murder fantasies, David wasn't performing a character, he was the character. The gore he once consumed for stimulation had become the language through which he expressed love. Every song, every video, every artistic statement was another step deeper into the darkness he mistook for genius. By now, David's art wasn't just inspired by his fantasies, it was becoming the blueprint for how he lived. And it wasn't long before those fantasies found a target. A girl who was far too young to understand the danger she was in. Celeste Rivas Hernandez was only 10 years old when David allegedly met her through Fortnite and Discord back in 2021. At the time, he was already starting to gain traction online, and she was just a fan, a kid who loved his music and thought he was cool. That innocence became his way in. David began talking to her regularly. At first, it looked like a typical creator-fan relationship. Compliments, inside jokes, harmless chats, but it escalated quickly. Private DMs, late-night voice calls, and exclusive access to his private servers, where, according to old members, David only added young girls. It wasn't subtle either. Discord logs later revealed users joking about the missing girl in David's server, and others mentioning payoffs. Hush money sent to Celeste's friends to keep quiet about her real age. On stream, Celeste even called him a child rapist, which sent David into a panic. He immediately told his moderators to delete everything. Screenshots surfaced, showing David threatening to sue anyone who leaked messages between him and Celeste. He bragged about having a legal team on standby and told fans he was untouchable. But nothing could hide the pattern anymore. The same username, the same voice, the same girl who kept showing up in his background. Celeste's brother later confirmed that David had told their family he wanted to marry her when she turned 18. He wasn't hiding the timeline. He was planning it. Every message, every lyric, every cryptic live stream was part of a years-long process of conditioning. To the public, he was the soft-spoken prodigy. Behind closed doors, he was systematically grooming a child and documenting the entire thing through art, music, and online chatter that was hiding in plain sight. By 2024, what started as admiration had turned into obsession and control. The servers went quiet. Celeste's social media accounts vanished. And just like that, the girl David once flaunted as his muse disappeared completely. But he didn't stop creating. He just turned her into a story, one that the world would later realize was real. As the investigation deepened, fans started digging through his catalog, trying to separate fiction from confession. But what they found didn't sound like artistic expression anymore. It sounded like evidence. David's breakout hit, Romantic Homicide, dropped on September 7th, 2022, Celeste's 12th birthday. The timing was brushed off as coincidence until people realized what the song was actually about: a lover's death, a body, the sound of someone gasping through guilt. It wasn't poetry, it was foreshadowing. In the official music video, David appears blindfolded, standing before what looks like a female body, surrounded by candles and symbolism straight out of a ritual. At one point, he's seen closing a suitcase, implying he's hiding something. And later, that image would become horrifyingly literal when police opened the trunk of his car. Fans then noticed a disturbing pattern. Every major release tied back to Celeste's milestones. Her birthday, their anniversary, the month she went missing, even the anime-style video for Rehab, released in 2025, showed a female character being butchered, literally cut into pieces by David's animated counterpart. Then came the unreleased track titled Celeste. In it, he describes a girl with his name tattooed on her chest, a girl who only opens up when she's high, and lyrics that blur love, control, and violence into one. It was no longer symbolic. it was specific, and when the leak spread online, fans who once called his songs deep or emotional were now horrified. The romanticism, the melancholic delivery, all of it was masking something predatory and real. It was the digital equivalent of a murderer writing poetry about his crime and watching millions sing along. Every track became a breadcrumb, every lyric a confession wrapped in melody. The more people listened, the clearer it became. David wasn't haunted by what he'd done. He was celebrating it. The music that made him famous was the same music that betrayed him. Every song, every video, every chilling lyric was a time-stamped clue in a trail that led straight back to Celeste. And whether he meant to or not, David had already confessed. He just did it to a beat. By this point, the line between fantasy and reality was gone. David wasn't writing about darkness anymore. He was living inside it. The gore addiction that started behind a screen had now spilled into the real world, and the final chapter of his fantasy was about to play out. In May 2024, Celeste told friends she was going to the movies with David. She never came back. Her phone went dark. Her social media accounts stopped posting. Her family filed a missing person report, but David said nothing. For the next several months, while her family searched desperately, David continued touring, smiling in interviews, and dropping cryptic posts online. He posted captions about souls staying connected forever, shared images of raw meat being sliced, and even joked about pouring boiling water on a girl for talking to another guy. Each post read like a taunt, the kind only someone who believed he'd gotten away with something would make. By the time investigators found Celeste's body in his Tesla, it had been over a year since she disappeared. The decomposition and severe weight loss suggested she'd been confined or starved for months before her death. She weighed just 71 pounds, down from 130. The sheer cruelty of it turned what was once seen as a tragic accident into a narrative of deliberate horror. And through all of it, David's public image stayed carefully curated. No missing vehicle report, no police cooperation until they came knocking. A car with built-in GPS. Ignored. It was as if he wanted it to be found. Because to him, discovery wasn't a risk. It was validation. The fame, the fascination, the myth. All of it fed the narcissistic fantasy his addiction had built. Even fans began noticing the symbolism in hindsight. His references to Dexter, the repeated mentions of roses and blood, and his obsession with death as devotion. It wasn't an artistic persona. It was a manifesto slowly playing out in real time. The fantasy had been executed to perfection, in his mind, at least. Celeste was gone, and the monster he'd spent years creating through gore, music, and obsession had finally stepped out of the screen. But what David didn't realize was that every lyric, every photo, and every careless post wasn't building his legend. It was building the evidence that would destroy it. By the time the investigation reached its peak, David's world, once carefully curated and perfectly polished, was collapsing in real time. The same platforms that built him were now dismantling him piece by piece. The LAPD seized his computer, hard drives, and several bags of evidence from a house rented by his manager. Inside were unreleased songs, Discord archives, and personal photos that tied every rumor to reality. Online, people started calling him the Bay Harbor Butcher, a direct nod to Dexter, the very show he'd obsessed over. It didn't take long for the industry to abandon him. His European and UK tours were canceled overnight. Kali Uchis publicly distanced herself, tweeting, "Not my friend," before pulling their collaboration entirely. Hollister removed his promotional campaigns. Streaming services began quietly shadowing his profile. No banners, no playlists, no press. The silence was louder than any statement. Meanwhile, journalists tore apart every piece of his digital footprint, revealing years of disturbing comments, nihilistic rants, and romanticized gore. His Discord logs read like a confession, his lyrics like a diary of guilt. And as public outrage grew, David's once devoted fan base turned on him, calling his songs haunting, sick, and a warning we all ignored. But the irony was poetic. The same gore addiction that had fueled his music, his fame, his rise, was the very thing that stripped it all away. Every graphic video he watched, every twisted lyric he wrote, had slowly been carving his own downfall until the artist and the monster were the same person. Today, David's career is effectively over. He hasn't been arrested, but he doesn't need to be. The evidence, digital, psychological, and symbolic, already convicted him in the court of public opinion. What began as a harmless curiosity spiraled into desensitization, then obsession, then real violence. And in the end, the thing he craved most, attention, became the very thing that exposed him. David Anthony Burke's story isn't about fame. It's about what happens when you feed darkness until it becomes the only thing you feel. A cautionary tale for a generation raised online and in the age of viral fame. Monsters don't hide in the shadows anymore. They perform on stage. Addiction doesn't always look like a needle, a bottle, or a pill. Sometimes, it looks like a kid with too much internet and no one watching. Someone who mistakes horror for meaning and pain for power. David Anthony Burke's story isn't just about a musician who fell from grace. It's about a generation raised on shock, scrolling past real violence until it stops feeling real at all, until the line between fiction and reality doesn't exist anymore. What began as curiosity became entertainment. What became entertainment turned into obsession. And that obsession, that need to feel something again, is what ultimately destroyed him. He lost his music. He lost his freedom. He lost his humanity long before the police ever showed up. Because when you feed darkness long enough, it doesn't just live in your head, it becomes the only voice you hear. So maybe the real horror of David's story isn't what he did, it's how many people saw it coming and mistook it for art.